In conversation with Riley Danvers. Riley Danvers is a bisexual and disabled poet living in the Pacific Northwest. She started publishing a short piece of creative writing in 2015 while she was pursuing her AS in English from Clackamas Community College. By the time she graduated with her BA in English Literature and Writing from Marylhurst University, Riley had seen nearly 30 individual pieces of fiction and nonfiction published in various literary journals and magazines, both online and in print. Starting in 2018, Riley also began submitting poetry for publication and began to see sources. She graduated in 2021 with her M.F.A. in creative writing from the Pacific Northwest College of Art, and in 2022, a debut collection of poetry, Even the Hair Too Heavy, was published by Fox Matter Press. In 2023, Riley released a debut novel, A Kiss of Glass, under the name J.D. Brubaker. The sequel, A Shade of Crimson, comes out next June. Riley also has a MA in Literature from Mercy College. And on today's episode of our interview, it's my utmost pleasure and joy to have on the show today Riley Danvers. How are you doing, Riley?
I am doing very well today, Peter. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. It's lovely. We're gonna be having a conversation around your writing. Sounds quite amazing to me, really.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah. So, Riley, could you tell us about your Sapphic legend and mythology dark fantasy novel, Ends of the Hoarder? And I want to say that's such an amazing title for a book, for a fantasy novel. Now, I'd love to ask you, how does this book come about? What inspired you to write Ends of the Hoarder?
Yeah, so this is my book, A Kiss of
Beautiful.
Glass. As you said, this is a dark fantasy sapphic
Mm.
retelling of the Cinderella fairy tale. Um,
Wow.
so I took the basic components of the Grimm brothers Cinderella fairy tale, the young orphaned girl turned into a servant who is mistreated, domineered at times
Mm.
um, by her, harsh, cruel mother figure, and kind of took those themes and adapted them to my novel, which is about a girl. She's not orphaned, but one day um, so her name is Nasia Ember.
Oh,
That is my Cinderella's character, her name. She's taken in by an all women's guild of assassins and trained to be
interesting.
an assassin herself.
Mm.
Um, the story covers two different timelines. There's the first, which is the prominent timeline, covers her training. So her childhood, being raised within the order, and learning to be an assassin. And then there's another timeline where she has already been an assassin for several years. And she's taking on an assignment, a new assassination assignment, where she is
Wow.
going to assassinate one of the princes at the ball.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of just the overview of what the book is. The novel actually started out as a short story.
Wow.
I was in my third year of undergrad at Marylhurst University.
Oh,
And I was in a short fiction class. We were writing lots of short stories. And the initial idea was that I wanted to write a story about a woman who attends a ball and then
hmm.
kills one of the guests.
Wow.
Um, but I wanted it to be kind of a mystery at first. Um, and as I was writing the story, it occurred to me that my character was a Cinderella archetype.
Wow.
Um, and it was at that point that I really leaned into more elements of the fairy tale and specifically the ball itself. The
Hmm.
short story didn't have anything to do with her childhood. The short story was strictly her attendance at the ball and
Wow.
her being hired to kill one of the princes.
Wow.
Um, and then years later, I mean, the short story was published online, and many years later I sent it to a friend, and he suggested I expand the story into a novel. um,
Interesting.
and I really didn't want to do that. It sounded like such a big endeavor.
Hmm.
And so I mostly just kind of added little pieces here and there, tried to make it a little bit longer. And every time I would send it to him and ask for feedback, he would insist this needs to be a full-fledged novel. It's just asking to be that.
Mm.
Um, and around that time, I had just been laid off from my job. So I had a lot of
Oh,
free time on my hands. And so that was
wow.
when I sat down and was like, we're going to do this. We're just going to make this a novel, I guess.
Wow. Wow. I love the sound of the making of this book. I love the onset. I love hearing about the beginning and, the start of it. Sounds quite amazing and quite inspiring as well to me. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and now I'd like to ask you, for readers who haven't read the book yet, and of course, without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what we'd expect in terms of themes picking up hints of the author?
Yeah, absolutely. So fairy tales themselves hold a lot of different themes inside of them just
Yeah,
inherently.
yeah.
And I wanted this novel and eventually the series as a whole, because it is the first book in a series, to touch
Well,
on similar themes. I think one primary theme is love, obviously. Fairy tales are obviously associated with the happily ever after, right? Sia is a character who is constantly looking for love and affection from the people around her.
mm,
She's particularly close with one of the other recruits within the Assassin's Guild, and her name is
wow,
Scarlet. And they form like a really close friendship, and Scarlet becomes one of the most important people in Nasia's life.
wow,
Um, Another way that the theme of love manifests in this novel is through Nasia's connection with the women who are training them to be assassins.
mm,
These women are called the mothers of the order. So they're kind of
wow,
taking on the role of like the stepmother in the Cinderella fairy tale. um, and she has to navigate these very complicated relationships that she has with these different women, and it's often a point of contention because she struggles a lot in training. So she struggles with some of the aspects of training, and there are a couple of the mothers that don't want to keep her in training, so
mm,
she's really kind of othered and mistreated by those women specifically. And she wants the familial connection. She wants to feel as though she belongs amongst this group
yeah,
of people,
mm,
um, and that it's just not the environment conducive to that. So that's kind of her wrestling with that need for love. um,
interesting.
and then I think another theme too that I wanted to play with was the theme of self.
Mm,
One of the reasons that Nasia struggles as much as she does, is because she doesn't have a fully formed sense of who she is.
wow,
Um, she's used to molding what she wants around the desires of everyone else.
yeah,
Um, and she doesn't really know how to have or enforce boundaries.
mm,
And this becomes a point of like personal conflict because she eventually is given the choice between continuing to live her life as an assassin or making a choice, and again without giving it away, like making a choice that would um, potentially bring her a lot of happiness.
mm,
And while the reader might see this choice as an easy one,
yeah,
for Nasia it's not an easy choice.
mm,
She doesn't know how to choose happiness because she's never had the chance to choose happiness before.
wow,
Um, and it makes her question everything she believes about herself and about her profession as an assassin. And I
mm,
think it points to that sensitive place inside of all of us that makes us
mm.
feel like we have to choose between what other people want for us and what we want
What we
for
want for
ourselves.
ourselves. Wow, I love that. I love that
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you so much, really, for adding these and exploring more on the themes contained in your book. And as you were speaking, you did mention something about series, and I'd like to ask you, do we expect more series, or is it gonna be a standalone, or do we say like second book, third book,
Mhm.
fourth book, etc.?
Absolutely. So right now, this series, it's slotted to be about 5 to 6 books. Um,
Wow.
so within, I wanted, it's called Hands of the Order because I wanted to kind of chronicleize um, each individual assassin's life. So each book is covering a different character that graduates their training as assassins with Nausea. So these are all other
Mm,
recruits that she was training with. And
mm,
each of them is also taking on a different character from a different fairy tale. So
interesting.
the next book, for example, is called A Shift of Crimson, and it's about Scarlet, her friend from training. And
Mm.
Scarlet is Little Red Riding Hood.
Wow.
And so book two is going to cover the Little Red Riding Hood fairy tale. Book three is going to cover the Nightingale fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. Um,
Interesting.
book four is going to be the Ice Maiden by Hans Christian Andersen.
Wow.
And I don't know what the other two are going to be. I haven't quite decided. I'm playing with the idea of maybe the
Yeah.
fifth book will be Snow White and Rose Red by the Grimm brothers. But that's a very short fairy tale and not a lot happens in it. So
Wow.
I'm struggling to figure out that, but there is an overarching plot that connects all five books. And
Mm.
that overarching plot is going to be resolved in the trilogy that comes after this first series.
Wow.
Um, but I need everyone to know who all the main characters are, which is why
Yeah.
this series is kind of separate from that.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you got quite a lot of books ongoing, quite a lot of, titles yet to be written, quite a lot of, works ongoing. So that's quite amazing to know, really. And thank you for sharing. Yeah. And now I like to ask you, there's this question I like asking authors that come on my show. I've always been fascinated and surprised about how writers, especially novelists like yourself, craft long sentences and bring works together in a way that it eventually makes a great novel. This always leave me thinking about how exactly did they got the ideas, put these works together? How did you do it really? I'm always surprised
Right.
about how they get the inspiration and ideas. And now, as far as writing is concerned, I'd love to ask you too. How do you get your inspiration and ideas? Where did they come from?
That's a good question. I think often my ideas come to me as very loose, very big generalities.
Wow.
So for example, I'm working on another series that I'm going to be publishing or start publishing later this year.
Oh.
And that series came to me as just a very generic idea. What if I wrote ancient Greek myths, but in a
Mm.
Regency setting? So, like Bridgerton or Jane Austen's time period. I had no details, I had no characters, I had no plot, just the
Wow.
basics of what if I rewrote ancient Greek myths in a setting that is not at all related to ancient Greece.
Wow.
Um, and in terms of, taking that general idea and building on it, um,
Mm.
with details as I'm writing a book, it's a little more complicated. The basic structure of a character itself
Yeah.
requires, or I'm sorry, the basic structure of a chapter requires a character, a setting, and at least one primary point of conflict or connection.
Yeah.
And so each scene in each chapter should either heighten or resolve that point of conflict or connection.
Perfect.
Um, so, for example, in A Kiss of Glass, Nausea is 18 years old in one chapter and goes to begin her life as a sex worker. This is
Wow.
an alias or a cover profession, for example.
Wow.
Um, and in this chapter, she ends up meeting the madam of the brothel where she's going to be working, and she meets the other coworkers that she would be working with. And
Oh.
there is no point of conflict in this scene. They're not angry with each other. There's no arguments. But there is a need for Nausea to become acquainted with these people. She has never met them before, and
Mm.
she's going to be living in the same building with them. She's going to be
Wow.
doing the same work that they do. And so I wanted to help develop these side characters. So I wrote a specific scene where she is meeting them for the first time, and it's through her perspective that she's observing their personalities, their
Mm,
banter with one another, their interpersonal connections. And I think sometimes ideas just come to me
mm,
in the moment, based on what it is a scene needs or what it is a chapter needs.
mm.
And the scene itself really dictates the direction that it needs to go to fulfill that.
Wow, it's quite amazing to have a snippet into how you get your ideas and inspiration. Sounds quite lovely to me. Thank you for
Thank
sharing with
you.
us. Yeah. And now, Riley, apart from Ends of the Author, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
I do. So you read in my bio that my debut poetry collection was published by First Matter Press in 2022. It's called Even the Air Too Heavy. And then I have three other books of poems that I have self-published. They're
Wow.
collections. I have a thing where on my Instagram I post like text image poetry. So they're very short poems that have some kind of image that goes with them, and I post those to Instagram. And these
Interesting.
self-published collections of poems, I take I'll take, say, all of the poems I published to Instagram for summer of 2020, and
Mm,
I'll put all of those into a collection. So those are my other three poetry books, and then I am working on the this second series of novels. They're kind of romance, they're kind of fantasy, they're kind
wow.
of neither. I don't actually know how to classify them, but it's the retelling of
Yes.
Greek myth in a
Yeah.
Regency setting. And they're more spicy. There's a lot more, I would say, sexual content in those because it's the ancient Greeks. Like you
Yeah.
can't really divorce that from the
Yeah.
ancient Greeks. Um, and then I'm always working on poetry. I constantly write poetry, so I have at least two other
Interesting.
poetry books I'm working on.
Interesting. I love the sound of that. Yeah. Lovely to know you're a poet and you got some other works ongoing. That's quite lovely to know. That's great. And now, let's talk about criticism and feedbacks. As authors, we all have different ways of reacting to feedbacks and criticism of our works. I'm curious to know your opinion about criticism. How do you react to negative feedbacks or reviews of your books if you've ever had one in time past?
I love this question because there are so many polarizing opinions about
Hmm.
how authors should and shouldn't react to criticism.
Yeah.
And there's so many different, I think, places that we can get that criticism from. We can get criticism from beta readers that we
Yeah.
send to look at our manuscripts. We can get
Absolutely.
criticism from friends and family who read the book. We can get criticism, from reviews that readers leave online.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it is important for authors to understand that criticism happens, and
Yeah.
it isn't a judgment call.
Hmm.
And I think I don't know how versed you are in stuff that like goes on TikTok or Goodreads, but there have been several instances now of authors who get, let's say, a 4-star review instead of a 5-star review, and they end up going and attacking the reviewer personally. They'll
Wow.
like share the review online, they'll make videos on TikTok, they'll make posts on Instagram, and they just tear the reviewer apart. um, and it's upsetting because readers, like us as authors, we are not entitled to everyone loving our book.
Yeah.
And it's unrealistic to expect that everyone is going to give us a 5-star review, and a
Yeah.
4-star review is still an amazing review.
Absolutely.
um but even if that reviewer were to have left a 1-star review, even if they really really hated the book, that's within the reader's right as a reader. and
Mm,
um and I know this question isn't specifically about reviews, but it is also a form of criticism. And I think there are some authors who simply can't handle
that's
that
true.
criticism. Um, and I tend to try my hardest to just keep myself in check. And it's too easy to fall into what I call the well of why. And,
Mm,
why didn't they like it? Why did they give me this review? What is it that
mm,
I did wrong? And none of that is necessarily even relevant when it comes to receiving criticism or feedback. Sometimes
mm.
our work just isn't right for someone,
Yeah,
and
that's
that's
true.
okay. It's
Yeah,
perfectly okay for my book to not appeal to everybody.
yeah.
Um, and so I try to remind myself, how would I feel if I were a reviewer and I was going out of my way to leave
To
my
leave a
opinion
review,
about someone's book and then got backlash for
it's not
leaving that
good,
review?
really.
It's not good. It's not good at all, Peter. And so I try to keep that in mind because it leads to too much of a toxic place. And I don't like that. I don't subscribe to that. And some authors don't even look at their reviews specifically because they know they're too sensitive to it, and I think that's a perfectly valid reaction. I love looking at my reviews, whether they're good or bad, because I use them for marketing purposes.
Yeah.
um, I don't just share the 4 and 5 star reviews. I
Mm,
actively share the 3, the 2, and the 1 star reviews, not to
interesting.
mock or berate the reader or the
Mm,
reviewer, but to show that there is a wide variety of reactions to my
to
book.
the book.
And
Interesting.
some readers will literally pick a book because it was given a 1 star review.
Absolutely,
Some,
that's true.
exactly. And so I do not want to present this idea that, I'm only getting 4 and 5 star
Positive.
reviews if I'm not.
Mm, mm,
Um, and I also just want my readers to know I don't care what you rate my book. Thank you for giving it a review in the first place, because
mm.
they don't have to do that. And every review is actually helpful to authors, whether it's a
Absolutely.
good or bad
A
review.
bad one.
Um,
Wow.
so yeah, that's kind of the stance that I take there.
Wow. I love your in-depth answer to this question. It's so in-depth, it's so profound, it's so informative, educative, and as well as inspiring, really. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I love your answer
Of
to
course.
your take on criticism. It's one that I would love to go back to later and rewatch so I can learn again. It's an
Oh, thank
amazing
you.
book.
That's so nice.
Yeah, I love it. Now, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered ever since you got published?
Yeah, publishing is hard. Publishing is really hard, whether you're going the traditional route and you're finding an agent and trying to find a publishing house, or if you're going the independent route and doing all of that yourself. There's so much work you have to do regardless of which path you choose. um, and I think one of the primary difficulties as an
Mm,
independently published author is knowing what to do to market my books. um, I have a lot of different social media accounts on different platforms, and I utilize them to talk about my books. I
uh,
utilize them to promote my books. And on those platforms where you can advertise, I try to pay and have advertisements of my books out as well.
mm,
Um, ooh, that was my dog. I'm sorry. And I also manage like my own website, where I promote my books. I have links for where people can buy my books.
mm.
Um, and it's I have a blog, and that's another way where I can try and engage with readers and people who might be interested. And while I get a good amount of reads on my blog posts,
Mm,
engagement is very fickle. Sometimes you'll get a lot of engagement, sometimes you don't get as much. And for an independent author, marketing is really the crux of how you make money. Um,
absolutely.
it's hard because as a writer, you want to just focus all of your energy on the creation of
Yeah,
your books. But the creation is only going to take you so far. And if you do want to get your books out there, like, marketing is something you absolutely have to do. And so I think it comes down to finding the things that I can do that don't make me miserable, even if it's something that works for other authors. So, for example, having a newsletter.
mm,
It's a big thing that helps a lot of independently published authors. And I hate managing my newsletter. I have one and I tend to send out updates like once or twice a month. I have a very small following on my newsletter. There's very few subscribers, but it's still something that I have to do. And the way I essentially try and manage the marketing side, and this was something I heard from Brian Cohen, who is an amazing like Amazon marketer, author and teacher, is 80% of my marketing strategy is the things I like to do. So making TikTok videos, making posts on Facebook, making posts on Instagram, the social media marketing side of it I enjoy. So 80% is that. And then 20% is the stuff that I don't like to do, but still has to be done. So researching how to have effective advertisements and, updating my newsletter and doing the other things that I don't particularly enjoy, but they have to be done. And just, I think another thing too is giving myself flexibility. I don't have to learn all of the things at once, and really pacing them out so that I don't overwhelm myself.
Wow. Wow, I love your answers to this question, really. I can go on and on, with this. It's very lovely, and I'm so impressed. And, thank you so much for sharing. This is quite amazing to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book? What would you advise people in this category?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my biggest piece of advice is to research the differences between traditional and independent publishing, because the requirements, the things you have to do depending on which path you choose is very different. And the traditional publishing world is also changing in big ways right now. So, for example, some people think that if they go the traditional publishing route, they won't have to do much marketing. And that's actually changing a lot right now. So understanding too that if you go the traditional publishing route, it can take a year minimum to find an agent, let alone an actual publisher. And I think, because I see this a lot with authors who are trying to find agents, and they're sending out query letters, and they're like, I've been querying for 6 months and I've sent out my query letter to like 15 agents. That's actually very small. That's a short amount of time, and that's a very small amount of agents to send to. So having the awareness of, I guess, understanding what you'll be facing as an author, depending on which publishing route you go, is incredibly important. Because then you can make an educated decision on what type of work you're actually willing to do. I was not willing to do the query letter, send out to agents, get the rejections, and keep doing that process. That was just not energy I was willing to exert. I would have rather just taken that time and that energy, invest it into my own marketing, and then just releasing my book myself. Not everyone has the ability to do that or the desire to do that, and neither choice is right or wrong. But knowing what you yourself as a new author are willing to do, what energy you're willing to invest in, is really important. And there's other things you have to do as an independent author. You have to figure out, cover design. You have to figure out, interior formatting.
Absolutely.
You have to research different publishing distributors. Are you going to publish through Amazon, or are you not going to publish through Amazon? And if you choose not to publish through Amazon, recognizing that it's going to be harder to find exposure to your book because Amazon is the biggest book retailer right now. And so just understanding all of those individual things. And I know that's not even really about the writing itself, but it does determine how that writing manifests later on.
Absolutely.
So I think that that's probably my biggest piece of advice.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for your advice. And I'm hopeful that viewers, including myself, will love to utilize it. Now, really, in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of any of your books. On what platform are they available on for purchase?
Yeah, so A Kiss of Glass is on Amazon. It's available in ebook and paperback. The
Interesting.
ebook is also on Kindle Unlimited. So if any viewers are registered as readers through Kindle Unlimited, then they get the ebook for free. Um,
Wow.
the hardcover is also on Barnes and Noble if people would rather shop through Barnes and Noble. If they don't want to do Amazon or Barnes and Noble, the
Yeah,
paperback is available on Ingram Spark as well.
beautiful.
So that is where A Kiss of Glass is available. And my poetry books are also all available on Amazon.
That's great. And I left a link in the discussion part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Riley Danvers' books directly on Amazon and also on other platforms. So thank you so much, Riley, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. It's awesome having this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I'm so, so glad that we got to do this.
Absolutely. I'm excited as well.